Ben, welcome.
Thank you, Julian. Good to join you today.
Yeah, good to have you here. So tell me, what's really present with you today?
A whole range of emotions. I'm about to head back to Sri Lanka. There's some uncertainty, like will there be flights available if things heat up with Iran, the conflict that's going on right now, and then getting there too. It's like once I'm there, they're going to be return flights a month later. It's time to
Yeah,
return, but if not, I'm pretty. Like when I first got there, it was quite a shock. Got off the airplane, and there were the country was in the midst of a brutal war that had gone on for like nearly 30 years, and sandbag uh, barricades and soldiers carrying machine guns, all that. Very lawless country at the time, and my first thought, like cruising or departing the airport, it was like, what the am I doing here?
hmm
It's very dark, dimly lit. It was like going back in time in a way, and I had some very difficult, even terrifying experiences at the time. There were a lot of dangerous people who should have been locked up, roaming free. And the situation has improved a lot since the war has ended. And for the first time, too, they actually have a president and prime minister who genuinely cares about the well-being of its citizenry, is making a real difference
hmm
in improving the lives. And so I feel much more hopeful and optimistic about that.
It sounds fairly scary then.
It was.
Yeah.
That
So
part's improved a lot.
what do you go there for then if it's so scary?
The connections that I've formed with people,
hmm
like even on the first day I was there, I was found my way to a place called Gulf Face Green, which is this beachfront. And I was sitting on a retainer wall. I guess that's what you call it. It's a wall just um, behind there's the
hmm
beach and the wall behind there. And and on one side, there's this derelict trying to hustle me. And on the other, well, I I intimidated the derelict enough. He got up and left. And the woman to my right, she said, I was worried about you, but you seem to handle yourself pretty well. Next thing you know, she's asking me, you want to have dinner with their family? And then the next day they come to collect me and I'm out in their village. And so over all these years, I've gone back and forth to Sri Lanka and I've been staying out in village areas. First, I was in the south, predominantly Sinhalese areas, and I was actually staying with the army family. The father was an officer. There were shell casings from artillery shells around the house. And but as time went on, I've been in relationships with several women over the years. I've been going back and forth for like over 20 years now. And and I connected with this Sri Lankan Tamil woman and making other friends from the ethnic Tamil community. And I came to understand, just the way the government had controlled the narrative. I mean, they actually hired a PR firm out of the UK and branding the Tamil Tigers as terrorists. And yeah, they did resort to terroristic activities uh, since the war ended. And I've spent a lot of time in the north in the former war zone. And you see how these governments influence the narrative and or control the narrative. And even knowing like senior commanders of the Tigers, the LTTE, uh, and talking to them firsthand, and it's like, and they'll tell you, it's like, we never wanted to fight, we never wanted this war, but our people were being killed, and you know, all kinds of other horrific things were being done to us, and we were doing what we had to do to survive. But I'm so thankful that I mean, even though the ending of the war was horrific and those who perpetrated the worst of atrocities were never held accountable, I'm so thankful that the war has ended. And, it's a new generation, it's a new time. The gross human rights abuses, the torture, the disappearances, all that have discontinued. I hear of a few incidences of things here and there, but for the most part, there's um, people are getting along, and the current government now is promoting more of a uh, people relating and bonding and you know
Hmm.
connecting with one another. So it's a very different time there. So, but but going back and forth, like for me, initially as a child, I was drawn to Native Americans, and and that fascination continued to grow. And at the age of 14, when I heard about their traditional Native doctors and the kinds of experiences they would have going through things like the Vision Quest, uh, where they would receive these kinds of gifts and develop these capacities to facilitate healing within individuals. These were some of the most powerful healers on the planet. And I was thinking at 14, well, if given the opportunity, this is what I'll do with my life. And so I took off at 17, found myself living in a community of Kiowa Indians in southwestern Oklahoma. And that too was quite dangerous. I mean, there was a lot of alcohol related violence. A number of my peers ended up dying in uh, incidents of uh, violence and of car crashes or throwing up and choking on their vomit after they passed out. But I was going into the ceremonies with the native elders that still follow the traditional practices, and that's where I met my mentor, Horace Dokai, who's one of their last surviving traditional doctors. And I spent a few years apprenticing with him, passed on portions of his healing gifts, and then in order to earn the right to work with these gifts of healing, it's expected one goes through the Vision Quest, which typically entails fasting the 4 days and nights alone in the mountains without food and water. Uh, but it was a very difficult transition to leave the native communities to come back into this uh, more mainstream society.
Hmm.
Uh,
So, what is it like for you then going into these different cultures, whether it's in Sri Lanka or it's on reservations here in the States? What's it like for you going into those from the outside?
in many ways, I feel that I've developed different sides of myself.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I carried a lot of trauma. I endured so much adversity throughout my childhood and adolescence. And the steps that I've had to take to heal that I feel I've developed these different sides of myself. And if I stay in one cultural context, like just currently I'm in the middle of New York City, and there's ways in which I feel flattened here that I can't really connect with people or open up and
Hmm.
share different parts of myself. So when I'm among Native Americans, there are aspects of my lived experience, especially like going through the Vision Quest and having trained with a traditional native doctor. I can share these aspects of myself. When I'm over in India and Sri Lanka, people, because of their own cultural context, the fact that they've had yogis, gurus, sadhus uh, that partake in these, or engage in these intensive practices to develop their bodies and minds, they can comprehend it. They get it. I mean,
Mhm.
there's some differences, but there are enough parallels. There's enough similarity.
Yeah.
And also the fact training with a Chinese master in Xingyi Quan, Baguazhang, internal martial arts that have their roots in Taoism. Even being over in China, I've spent uh, 2 weeks the first time, a month the second time. Hardly anyone spoke any English. At that point, I was relying on a Chinese English dictionary and pointing at words, and somehow I managed to communicate. But even there was a sense that like transitioning out of native culture and coming back here, a lot of people couldn't understand or comprehend the kind of experiences that I've had yet.
So what I hear you're saying is the connection's a big piece for you. Whether
Yeah,
in all of these places that you're traveling or connecting with people, it's the connection there.
to me, I feel the connections that I share with those individuals that I care about
Mhm.
are the most valuable aspect of my life. Like on one hand, like anyone, it's life is expensive these days, affording rent and food and
Mhm.
everything else that we need to sustain ourselves. But without those connections, there's an emptiness. And that's one of the biggest challenges of the time spent in New York City is that the fleeting nature of interactions with people. People have a way of showing up and disappearing, and
Mhm.
it's I've found it much harder. The reason I stayed here was to train with this Chinese master because I felt it was a once in a lifetime opportunity.
In New
It-
York?
yeah, yeah. And for him, it works better because there's a extended Chinese community and he's already married. And, so it's, and people of various ethnicities that come to New York City and they have these uh, various ethnic communities. Chinese or Ukrainian or whatever, Colombian, Dominican. And you could, if you come from one of these communities, it's a lot easier to, there's more of a bonding, there's more of a connectedness among these communities.
Yeah.
But I hadn't found that so much in New York City.
Mhm.
So for me, this is a place to come and
Yeah.
just do as much work as I can and then get on the plane, go back to Sri Lanka.
Why do you think connection's so difficult here in the States?
It varies. I mean, in other cities, in places I've spent time, like when I've been in Kansas City, for instance, time I've spent in Oklahoma, time in New Mexico and Colorado, eh, the connections are, have found much more substantial. Even Boston, where I worked uh, about at least a third of the time that I was on the East Coast for years, I'd commute every other week. And initially, it could be more challenging, more difficult to make that initial connection, to establish the bond. Yet I found compared to New York City that once you did, or I established bonds with people in the Boston and Massachusetts, that the connections were much more durable. I've had quite a few connections with people that have eh, over many years that extended for decades.
Mhm.
Whereas in New York City, even after all these years, there are times where I feel like I hardly know anybody. And before COVID, I offered classes on a weekly basis, helping people get over breakup and divorce and struggling with abandonment, attachment wounds, unrequited love, all these things. And when I had those weekly classes and people were cycling through week after week, and this is for about 11 years, then I felt somewhat more connected, but still, there's a way in which in New York City, people would just show up, disappear, and often I never see or hear from them again, which has been the most difficult aspect. But even in Kansas City, Albuquerque, Oklahoma, yeah, there too, I have long-standing connections with people that go back. years, if not decades. But again, it also comes to resonance because you asked about being in these other countries. There's, being in Sri Lanka, for instance, there's a much greater sense of warmth and empathy, a greater depth of connection.
Mhm.
And, and I'd have these experiences like it's time to go back to the airport, feeling sad about leaving. But there are times when I've had a whole van full of people riding to the airport with me to see me off. That's never happened in America.
Right. What do you feel in telling me that?
Longing,
What do you mean?
a deep sense of longing
Yeah.
to return.
Mhm.
And it's a really mixed bag right now, the way things have transitioned
Mhm.
in that on one hand, before COVID, I was offering the classes on a weekly basis. And this transition was happening gradually up to COVID, that people were less inclined to show up for live events. People were spending more and more time behind their devices, their
Mhm.
computers and smartphones and tablets, as opposed to getting out and directly engaging. Well, one thing I like about Sri Lanka is that it's not quite as bad there yet. I'm hoping that it doesn't catch up. I think it is heading in that direction as well, though.
Mhm.
But as time has gone on and we're spending more and more time on our devices, there's that means less time of direct engagement. We're just not spending as much quality face to face time with one
Sure.
another. We need that direct engagement. We nourish each other, we feed each other by doing so. And there's valuable content online. For instance, you could be listening to this podcast as you're commuting to work. And yet, if you're on the if you're commuting by public transit, if you're in your car, yeah, keep listening. But if you're on public transit and you see someone that you feel some sense of resonance with, start a conversation. Look for I would do this all the time. Look for any excuse, anything you could comment on, and just engage with the people in
Yeah.
your immediate proximity.
Why is that so
Mhm.
difficult for people right now? Like, I understand that technology is so prevalent and it's a major force in disconnecting, despite the fact that it's called social media. Yeah, it really creates a schism between interactions, and most people don't really interact or know how to interact anymore. So, why do you think it's become so hard? And it sounds like here in the States, it's particularly difficult. I can certainly attest to that, that it's very easy to be isolated and disconnected here. But then there's other places all around the world or even within the States where connection's a lot easier. Why is that, do you think? Why is it so difficult for us to connect right now?
I think there is a tendency as human beings, if there's an easier way or what's perceived as easier, that we tend to default to that. Maybe it's a laziness on our parts, but and this is occurring for a number of reasons. Let's take dating for instance. So if you go back a number of decades into the 70s and 80s, and things were opening up, even back in the 60s. And if you want to meet someone, if you're interested in meeting, connecting, if you didn't have the good fortune of being introduced by someone that you already know, friend or family member, it was up to you to walk up and talk to that person, to engage them, to start a conversation. And I could see a number of things happening. In many respects, even as a man, I identify with a lot of feminist issues. it's horrific to me to see, like in India, for instance, they have the term Eve teasing, but it's sexual harassment of women, groping and uh, inappropriate comments. It could happen on public transportation, and it horrifies me. And and the fact that the Indian government doesn't take a much harder stance against sexual assault and other gross violations. Yet in the United States, in any movement can go to the extreme, and I think there's an unfortunate tendency that a lot of activists and political pundits fall into this mode of thinking that they have to go to the extreme because it takes that extreme to hold people's attention. And so the mindset that was being instilled, and I would see this more, especially in the Boston area, um, you know, activists like Marilyn French, all men are basically rapists. They rape us with their eyes, their laws, and their bodies. And it's like, that's not helping anybody. And it just, it fuels that, or feeds into that mistrust and that suspicion. And I could see how that was making it so much more difficult internalizing that mindset and the emotions that were generated thereof.
Mhm.
Yes, there are, and it's true, men perpetrate the vast majority of violence and uh, other harmful behaviors, gender-based violence, and whether it's physical, verbal, emotional. Yet, when that gets generalized to the male half of the human species, I think that has improved to some degree. Dating apps have, even though they have harmed in some other areas, I feel that um, they have helped to some degree there. People are connecting a bit. Now, with dating apps too, the problem with that is there's still there's the discomfort of that comes with approaching. And a lot of times, if a man attempts to approach, he gets shot down. A lot of men fearing rejection, the pain of putting himself out there and encountering a very harsh negative response. And so rather than endure that, a lot of guys are more apt to rely on dating apps.
Sure. But
Yeah,
we have a couple things here. So the
yeah,
function of the dating app isn't necessarily to find you love or connection. The
yeah,
function of the dating app is to get you coming back to the dating app.
yes,
And they're mining your information, and then they're using, or even you could say weaponizing your information against you
yes,
to manipulate you emotionally and behaviorally in multiple ways. And then on the other hand, yes, there's this really strong growing mistrust in
yeah,
everybody. And it's not
hmm,
just women who hate men. When I was in university and when I was in Chicago, I was taking these feminism classes, and
hmm,
I was the only man in the class.
hmm,
And these women were saying that all men are rapists and that
hmm,
men should be, I mean, made publicly humiliated or displayed like the old hangings, the gallows kind of deal in the center of a city, except, they want to be hung up by their testicles.
yeah,
Um, I mean, just seeing the raw hatred straight towards men. And then when I went on the West Coast, there is such a strong, deeply entrenched hatred towards men, to where the point where it's almost like men aren't allowed to exist anymore. And so then you got these dating apps that are putting people through these algorithms and these
uh-huh,
programmings that are really shaping the way. And it's not just dating apps, it's a lot of the media and social media. They're really shaping the way that we think or see each other. And then you got this really intensifying mistrust or borderline hatred. And it's not to say that men are perpetrators and women are victims, because women can absolutely be violent. It's just they're not
Mhm.
physically violent. They're violent in lots of other ways, manipulation, or getting people on their team, or um, really manipulating narratives, ways that we think
Mhm.
about things and hear about things, then using systems and structures to physically attack or oppress somebody else. So this seems to be a really growing trend right now of this mistrust and then the
Mhm.
use of violence. I mean, if you think about, so what you were saying here a minute ago, Ben, is go back several decades and people had to approach one another and talk to each other. Well, if you go to a nightclub or a bar or any kind of social gathering today as a young person, and then you're going to shoot your shot, you're going to try and talk to and engage with somebody, you're going to be recorded while you're doing it.
Mhm.
Somebody's recording you. And then that twisting and manipulating and the display of the thing that just happened, they take the video and they can manipulate it so it looks like you're some sort of nasty perpetrator, and then it's all over the internet. So
Mhm.
this fear and distrust is really deeply entrenched and causing a major schism, it seems like, in terms of how we interact with one another.
I love the way you articulated that. And I grieve on one hand
Mhm.
the loss of this connectedness that was more a part of our culture here in the United States. And you see this politically too, how with people like Rush Limbaugh coming in at first. Before that, the discourse was much more civil. It even with people on different sides of the political spectrum, there wasn't
Yeah.
such a polarization. But this is happening across the board, whether it's in the political realm,
Hmm.
whether it's this polarization within the between these barriers that are created between men and women, which I feel is truly tragic.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've strived to do, again, because I carried such profound trauma from my own childhood and adolescence. So as I was coming of age, I was forming attachments to women who were quite wounded
Sure. Yeah.
themselves. And a lot of them were just not a good match for me. And when you're that dissociated and carry so much trauma, you have that profound disconnect. Your internal drivers are all screwed up. And
Yeah.
so it messes with your ability to form healthy attachments.
Most of the times we'll attract people who are going to hurt us and who are going to
I
treat us
did.
poorly because we can mistake connection and love for abuse and trauma and pain.
Right. Yeah. And so instinctively, I taught myself this. This is turned into a whole system of meditation. But initially, I would dive into the depths of the pain and I would keep breathing fully, sometimes for hours on end. At a certain point, it would break open. I could feel the pain coming out of my body in waves. I'd experience this growing sense of connectedness to a higher power opening, emerging from within. That helped me to begin to dissolve those unhealthy attachments. And I started exploring any therapeutic intervention that helped promise deep tissue body work, sessions with gifted healers. Most powerful is the Vision Quest, the 4 days and nights alone in the mountains without food and water. It's a traditional Native American practice again.
Okay. Okay.
And
Hold on one second,
go ahead.
Ben. Okay.
Mhm.
No, we're getting into something really important here, and I want to go step by step with this.
Okay.
So first thing is polarization. It's not just the genders like we started off talking about. It's everything across the
Everything.
board,
Mhm.
everything. Democrat, Republican, and even inside of that, they're all totally fragmented and polarized.
Yeah.
And we've seen this really intentional programming all everywhere. And it really accelerated during COVID, where I mean, the messaging was quite literally, "Don't trust your neighbor," and
Yeah.
disconnect. Don't be around people. So this is everywhere. I think people. We don't need to really explain how deeply polarized people are. I think that everybody is aware of this on some level right now. Is things are getting
Hmm.
so polarized, we can't even have a basic interaction with each other anymore.
Right.
So that's really important. But let's move into where you're going to next, which is the what do we do with this? How can we start to get past the polarization and reconnect with each other? And you started off with something really important, which was not going and trying to reconnect with other people. You said that you grieve, you feel this pain, there's a fear, there's wounds here. And rather than avoiding it or distracting with it through social media, for instance, or trying to engage with other people, you're talking about turning your attention into that pain, spending time with that pain. And sometimes you said it takes hours at a
Hmm.
time. But when you continuously spend time with that pain, is it opens up or it
Hmm.
transforms or something happens here. Let's go into this right here. I think this is really important. I think everybody's seeing we're polarized, we're fragmented, we're isolated, we're disconnected. Now, what do we do? And I think everybody wants to go into the right away. I want to go out and change things in the world. I want to make big changes out there, and I want to change the way those people think too. And this is just perpetuating the disconnect. So let's go into this. I turn inward. I face the pain that I carry myself and I work with it. Talk to me some more about that.
Well, again, our over reliance on all this digital media is when we're not engaging with other people, it's reinforcing the disconnect and
Hmm.
we're internalizing these voices, often very toxic, um, dialogue, whatever.
Yeah.
Are. But anyway, at the time that this was happening for me, and I'll relate this to your listeners as well, I was having reflected back to me my own emotional wounding through the relationships,
Yes.
to the women that I was attracting at that time. And so when it was evoking such e- overwhelming, at times excruciating emotional pain, I brought as much awareness as I could. A lot of people are able to disconnect, to compartmentalize, push the pain down. They suppress, they distract themselves,
Hmm.
or
Disconnect.
disconnect
Yeah.
in whatever way. But in doing that, that pain gets pushed down into the body.
Hmm.
In my case, I was not able to disconnect. I was engulfed by it. So my only choice was to go through the middle. And so diving into the depths of what I was feeling, I would breathe often for hours on end. As I said, breathe into the depths of what you're feeling. You're not looking from a distance. You're fully immersing your awareness in the depths of these emotions, breathing softly and deeply. Stay with the feelings, stay with the bodily sensations. Allow them to go through their progression. They may intensify, they may move into other areas of your body. You may go through a whole succession from anger to grief to sadness to resignation to letting go. That's one of many progressions. Stay with the feelings, give it the time it needs, and then incorporate the most effective therapeutic interventions because the practice I shared activates this innate healing intelligence residing within your body and mind. I do this practice on a daily basis. Uh, you don't always have to be in the midst of a breakup or divorce or being jerked around.
Of course.
I can be just tuning into physical sensations in my body
It's a
or,
practice.
yeah, daily practice.
Mhm.
And what I find is working with this practice helps to strip down or dissolve much of this residue of the stresses of daily life, the residue of all these emotions that have accumulated, the traumas we carry. It's day by day working with this practice. It's dissolving, digesting more of this residue. And so you, by doing so, I'm connecting more and more with this inner core being,
Okay.
strengthening this connection.
Yes, yes. You're bringing up something really important when you're talking about digesting,
Mhm.
right? When you started off, you were saying we disconnect and we can suppress, and that's a form of getting away from the feelings, but you
Yeah,
can also be overwhelmed by it because when we take an emotion, a pain, an anger, something that we've been feeling, and we stuff it down and bury it, is it doesn't go away.
it
A-
doesn't.
and in fact, it gets more and more powerful as time goes by. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger. The
Mhm.
reason is it's trying to get our attention. It's here for a reason. It needs to serve a purpose. And if we're trying to bury it or suppress it, it's going to keep getting bigger. And if we're distracting and trying to avoid it, it's going to keep trying to get our attention. So I think people, on the one hand, almost universally, every person I've ever worked with suppresses their emotion, myself included. And then
Everyone to some degree. Mhm.
well, that's what we learned. That is
Mhm.
absolutely. I mean, we get it from basic parenting, from really well-meaning parents, of course, who are consulting their doctors or experts. And then, of course, you got your wounded parents who are really traumatized and spreading it too. So we all
Yeah.
learn to suppress our emotions on the one hand, but then those emotions get so big that we can't avoid them anymore. And that's usually like the big moment where something has to shift and people say, okay, something's got to change, but we don't have to wait till it gets there. So you're talking about instead of avoiding these, to really turn into these feelings, to reconnect with what's stored up in the body, what lives here, what lives in the field of experience that we still have, and then going in and actively engaging with it. Now you're using breathing as a technique here, which I agree is fantastic. But what I've also found too is a lot of the times the breathing can also be used as a way to disconnect from the feeling. So when I have that pit or that tension or that anger that's inside of me, I can just breathe and then I can ignore it. But you're talking about something further than breathing with it, which is where you got into the digesting it, the actually working with it. Talk to me about this right here. How do you go into those feelings that you have stored up or repressed that have been building up? And what are you doing with them actively? What is your practice with working with them?
When we were children and getting these immunizations, smallpox and measles, whatever, and they taught us to dissociate,
Hmm.
to imagine that we're at some amusement park or wherever, and and we learn to disconnect. And also because we're shamed for, especially as a boy, you're not supposed to cry. We learn to disconnect from our emotions.
Yeah.
But
Or
in
have
this
any
case,
emotions, right?
yeah. And and definitely what you mentioned, a lot of people will use breathing or meditation practice to disconnect, to disassociate. I do the exact opposite, which I encourage you, the listeners, all to do, is when strong emotions arise, or even just longing or any feelings, any bodily sensations, bring as much awareness as you can to what you're feeling. I do this while doing sitting practice, but if you only do this while sitting, you're missing so many opportunities. As I continue to work with this practice, I bring it into conversations. One time while walking down 8th Avenue, I see this woman walking by, and there's this feeling like my heart just fell out of my chest onto the pavement as I'm watching her walk off into the distance. And it's like, well, okay, it's New York. Maybe she's going to react to me or something, but let's see what happens. She turned into Rite Aid. I'm standing there in the doorway, and I direct questions to my subconscious mind. It's like, okay, what do I do? So I walk up to the card rack and I go, I have some friends who are getting married. I go into actor mode here. Uh, this card selection here is not too impressive. Can you recommend something? And I just wanted to connect, use any pretense, but, and I was feeling very nervous, very shy, inhibited at the moment, but I started breathing into that in the moment as I was talking with her. And, and she was the conversation was continuing, and part of me is like, wow, and I could feel part of me wanting to hold on, like, I want this to continue. It's like, oh, that's not good. Let go. Just completely let go. And she could go whenever she wants. And I'm going to draw my awareness back to myself, what I'm feeling in the body. I'm feeling shy, a little awkward. I'm going to keep breathing into that. I'm going to drop further into it, keep digesting what I'm carrying, what's coming up. And as she continued, I mean, this conversation went on. And at one point, I shifted my angle a little and she moved over where she's directly in front of me. And then about a minute later, I took a step back. She takes a step toward me. And and then finally I said, "You told me you were on the way to meet someone, and we've been talking for at least 40 minutes here." And she acknowledged it. But whatever interaction, and I've also done this in the midst of heated conversations. One of my family members who has a certain volatility about her, and I knew that she would continue to escalate. And so as she's in this emoting explosively, I'm breathing into what I'm feeling in that moment in my body. And there's this effect of, it's called sympathetic resonance or phenomena, that if you strike one tuning fork, the next one starts vibrating. And so as I go into state, as I work with my own emotions, what I find is it drops people into their bodies and into
Mm,
their emotions. It connects them.
yeah.
And for me, what's important is, as I said, one of the most valuable things of all for me in life is the connections I share with other people. And for the most part, I find it easier to connect with women. I tend to have more women friends. I prefer women friends overall. Men such as yourself, Julian, are the exception, that I can have a deep connection, could really communicate on a very deep level where we have so much
Mhm.
to share, to engage with. But aside from individuals such as yourself, or men such as yourself, I generally connect better with women. And so when I'm out, as much as I can, I want to engage. I want to start
Yeah.
conversations. I want to bridge the gaps and trust and empathy
Mhm.
to to be able to have this mutually caring exchange. And I approach relationships from a standpoint of, how does this relationship naturally want to evolve?
Yeah, and you're exercising choices.
Yeah.
The choice to let something evolve in itself like that, like,
Hmm.
when you were talking about being in the store in Rite Aid and you were afraid, you had lots of fear over and over and over, fear of approaching her and fear of her rejecting you, fear of her leaving. By making the choice to actively engage with that fear is then you can make space for something to emerge. And I
Hmm.
think this is super important because awareness is the prerequisite for making choices. So first thing is you have to be aware, oh, I'm afraid. There's this fear that's here. I'm afraid of interacting. I'm afraid of her leaving, so on and so forth. And if that fear is ignored, and if that fear isn't engaged with or you disconnect with it, as it gets bigger, and then just like those tuning forks that you're mentioning, is it spreads.
Hmm.
So when we interact with somebody who's really angry, or who's really scared, is our emotions then get activated and we get angry or we get scared because we see that as a threat.
Hmm.
I remember this when I lived in Portland, Oregon for 10 years, super dangerous place, especially for somebody who looks like me. And I remember when I was walking around the streets, I was just generally afraid of every single person that I was walking past. And I would start looking at them with those suspicious eyes of, what are you going to do? Are you going to spit on me? Are you going to attack me? Are you going to berate me? because it was happening so frequently. And at some point, I had to ask myself, wait a minute, am I drawing that in? Is my suspicion and my fear coming off as some sort of dangerous threat to this person? And are they resonating with it? And then are they acting out the fear or suspicion? And once I became aware of that and I started to really work with that fear, just like you're talking about, and I could regulate, I could be attuned to that fear, and I could be at peace with myself. Even if I'm scared, I can still be at peace, as I found that while the attacks didn't stop entirely, they dropped drastically. It was noticeable. I still get attacked in Portland. That's why I had to leave. But it wasn't like I was calling it in subconsciously. So this resonance, I think, is really important because if we are ignoring our own emotions and we're not connecting to ourselves, then that just kind of comes out in a very unstructured, a lot of times inappropriate ways, unconsciously. And then the other person responds and reacts to it. So if we want to start to have connections with other people, yeah, I agree with you. We really have to work on our own emotions first. And if we can be attuned to our own emotional experience. And if we can process and regulate ourselves, well, that spreads out just like the tuning fork that you're talking about, and other people can grab onto that and connect with it as well.
Yeah, and many of us, all of us to some degree, are locked into holding patterns. Being so dissociated as I was years ago and carrying the extent of the emotional wounding, the trauma, I kept forming attachments to women in those days who
Of course.
either there's a lack of resonance or some who were quite abusive.
Hmm.
And what I was carrying was attracting the individuals who would reenact a lot of these very
Hmm.
hurtful early traumatic experiences. But what I found is that by working with the practice and digesting what I was carrying. And also, the other thing we need to understand there are limitations to our body and mind's own innate healing intelligence. We also need to incorporate the most effective therapeutic interventions available because in doing so, the deep tissue body work and homeopathic remedies, for instance, help to dislodge and bring into awareness the emotions that were held deeply in the body that I was numb to or disconnected from. The sessions with gifted healers and even more so the Vision Quest, I could feel this presence working within me, transforming, transmuting a lot of what I was carrying and this new foundation taking shape. And so this has been an ongoing process for me to and I continue to gauge like how people interact with me. And I see that as a reflection of what I'm carrying, what I'm holding. To some extent, it's a reflection. There's also, we get into society and there's what society, the collective. And as a collective, the fact that the polarization and the disconnect where people are not engaging with one another's this reflects the collective dysfunction, the collective wounding. But I feel it's so important for each of us as individuals. We face challenges of one form or another. You know, being in the northern part of Sri Lanka, it's the temperatures up in the 90s and it's hot. And it's at the time we're recording, it's a lot hotter in the United States, even in certain areas. That's that's the environment now. It's just the heat, and that can be difficult for some of us to endure the heat. Again, that's the environment. So there's an environment socially. We get out and people are not as present, not as engaged as they once were. We don't have quite the sense of community that was so much a part of our lives decades ago. There's the polarization. But to the best of our ability, yes, these are the factors. If we're in Ukraine, for instance, there's um, Shahed drones and there's ballistic missiles flying in. We face these challenges, whatever context we find ourselves in. I feel it's important to show up as fully present as we can to engage with people despite the challenge, despite the discomfort, despite the hardships and adversities.
Yeah.
I
That's the
feel
quest.
that's the quest.
That's the quest right there. You know, we can't control the world that we were born into or the
Right.
world that we live in. And that's the world that shaped our minds. That's shaped the ways that we think about things, the way we see things, the way we interact
Mhm,
with things. But we can take responsibility for the way that we interact with that world.
mhm,
And while, yeah, people might be very disconnected, dissociated, not present, dangerous, downright dangerous. Everywhere you look, it is dangerous right now. And
mm,
we have to make a choice. What do we want to do with that? Do we want to shell up and run away and hide from it and try to, you know, find some semblance of peace or safety? Or do we want to create something new inside of that? That's the choice that every one of us is being faced with right now.
mhm.
And whether we consciously are making that choice, we're all engaging with it. And yeah, that's really the big journey of our life right there is okay, all these people around me are disconnected and dissociated. Can I be a force of presence and connection that can show them that there's something else there? I can't force anybody to do it. I can't try to change anybody into doing it, but I can do it with myself. And I think that that's the big vision quest right there is to turn inward and to say, I'm going to answer the call to engage with life. And I'm going to go on a journey and I'm going to set, you know, little, they can be as small as we want, journeys that we have to go and fulfill. And it can be the big one that you keep talking about. You can go and do 4 days and 4 nights of isolation and fasting, which is incredible. It'll open you up to so many things. It could be something like, today I'm not going to run away from my anger, or today I'm not going to run away from my fear. In fact, I'm not going to distract. I'm going to just turn in and face it. Or today I'm going to take time to continuously try to engage with my emotions. Or I'm going to face that pain that I've been carrying. Those are all fantastic quests. And I think that that's something that would really empower a lot of us daily to engage with.
Yeah, and be open, be engaging. One of the things that I've found is that as I continue to do this practice, incorporate the interventions, is that I become so much more empathic, empathetic, and I will engage with people. I'll just lightly glance off of them and see how responsive they are. And if it feels good, and if they're open, receptive, I'll continue to engage and continue if that
Yeah.
connection wants to go further. And there's also how these days there's it takes so much more effort. When I started my practice, having trained with a traditional Native American doctor, a medicine man, I work in that context as indigenous healers have done for thousands of years. And I miss how it was back in the 90s when it was so much easier and I could show up occasionally, speak with groups of people. I even go on the radio, and the responsiveness of people was so much greater because they weren't so overly saturated by
Yeah.
just a flood of digital content
Yeah.
flying through their
Overstimulated.
sensory channels, overstimulation.
Now we got all the AI junk muck that's
Yeah,
just flooding everything.
everything. Yeah. And so I have to work so much harder because people's attention spans are much shorter. It's rewiring our brains. So uh, it's changing the brain's neurostructure. It's
Mhm.
changing the biochemical makeup of the brain so that we tend to skitter across the surface of reality.
Yeah.
And so that's another reason why practice is so much more important in this day and age.
Yeah.
People say, "Well, I don't have time to do all that, to sit for hours doing meditation. Well, how many hours are you scrolling per
Yeah.
day?
How can you ever have time if you don't take time?
Yeah,
There's a
make
very
time.
this is a very sinister, intentional effort to disconnect people, and I'm
Yeah,
not just talking about from each other, I'm talking about disconnecting them from life, so we all become like these NPC video game characters who just stay in the exact same spot and just answer with the, one or two pre-approved responses that we can have. Everybody's kind of falling into that, and it's dangerous. It's really intentional. It's really malicious. And yeah, we've got to
mhm.
engage with that and make choices on what we do with it.
And it creates a greater need, dependency on digital feeds and on,
Hmm.
uh, material that we would acquire buying products and items, whatever, to feed that emptiness, that void we carry within ourselves because we're not connecting with other human beings
Sure.
and nurturing one another in the way that we truly need to.
That's another very sinister and very intentional programming that's out there is whether it's the emptiness of disconnect or it's the fear of catastrophe and all the bad things that are going on. You see it all over the internet and you see it all over any media that you can consume is I'm going to scare the shit out of you. And then I'm
Mhm.
going to offer you the product that you can buy that will make you feel better. So if you don't feel like you're good enough or you don't feel worthy or deserving or you're isolated and disconnected and you got all these problems and pains, don't worry about those. Buy my product and then you can buy another one. That's pretty much the messaging that's out there. And it's just crammed down our throats. I mean, I loathe social media, but I have to go on there to post things because I want to
Mhm.
share specific messages. And just the moments that I'm on there, I can just see how much of it is just crammed and just put right into our awareness. It's unavoidable.
Yeah, for me, it's like having to take on a whole second job I never intended to take on, having
Sure.
to utilize social media. And there's a lot of resistance to technology. In years past, I would get so frustrated and walk away. And the fact that we have this whole influencer culture, I'm actually thankful to see the Tate brothers arrested. That's, oh God, talk about toxicity. I mean, the violence, the misogyny is, and there are a lot of very caring, empathetic males. Referencing back to what we were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
I've worked with many individuals over the years where maybe it was the mother who was abusive or
Yeah.
abandoned the children, and it was the father who was the saving grace who
Sure.
assumed full custody and cared for the children
Yeah.
and
But these
yeah,
algorithms, they love the toxic. They love the trauma. Their intention is to
they
spread.
feed it. They
Yeah.
feed it.
They want to spread it.
Yeah, and even things like, with pit bulls, for instance, dogs, the media, if it bleeds, it leads. And so you have just thousands upon thousands of pit bulls, and many of them are very loving, sweet dogs. But people are going to go get their um, poodles and their schnoodles or
Yeah.
whatever, all these designer breeds, uh, uh, and yet thousands of these dogs. And I ask people, please don't go to breeders and don't go to pet stores. Go to your shelter because very likely you are saving a life and you will prevent these dogs from being euthanized or languishing indefinitely in a shelter.
Sure.
Have compassion, have empathy, stop feeding the problem because every time a litter is born, it's feeding the overpopulation, which means more dogs will suffer. Getting off on a tangent there, but I've had to condition myself too. So another thing that's important here is facing my internal resistance to the technology. It's another area where strong emotions are triggered. And I've taught myself to go into all the frustration and the anguish, even at times, the anger, and stay with it until I master that task. One thing I do want to challenge people to, getting back to relationships here, is that I spent decades of my life training with a Native American doctor, with a master from China, connecting with other people in the Hindu Vedic tradition, sadhu, and uh, other individuals, and those who attain mastery do so through hours and hours of intensive daily practice, continually developing their bodies and minds. And there is the, working with the practices, the various forms of meditation, like, for instance, what I shared earlier. And the advantage of the meditation practices I developed is they are much more embodying. They get you into your body and working effectively with your emotions. But one thing I really want to challenge all you listeners to do is that take relationship as a path of personal and spiritual evolution. Show up to the best of your ability to engage. We do have to be careful these days. If we attempt to engage with someone in a bar in a setting like that, we could have somebody filming us with their camera. We could end up on YouTube. So gauge the situation. And there are times when I've been on the street, on the subway, in the supermarket, and I would just start conversations. If you feel drawn to someone, if you feel find yourself attracted on some level, if you're in a class, a workshop, in a museum, instead of relying on dating apps. And even if you're not necessarily romantically interested, I would go in with this openness, even if it was like turned into a platonic friendship. I was perfectly content. Keep myself open, engage. If that person's reacting, is shut down, doesn't want to talk, walk away, let it go. If it's eliciting that pain of rejection, or if you're feeling anxious, work with the practice I was sharing. Immerse yourself in those feelings. Breathe from the depths of those feelings. Stay as present with you as you can, because as you do so, it helps you to work through that, and you become more embodied, more present, and
Yeah, that's right. Ben, for anybody who's listening and heard that and wants to find more information about you or any of the work that you've put out, where can they find you?
there are a number of ways, starting with my main website, then oofana.com. I'll send those details over for the show notes. Teachmetomeditate.com, because I teach this whole system of meditation practices, breakup first aid. If you're right in the midst of a breakup, divorce, you've been ghosted, heal my heartache. If long-standing patterns of rejection, abandonment, struggling with attachment wounds, you can find me on Instagram, uh, my YouTube channel. There's a lot of long form video. There's a contact form on my main website, and a heartache hotline when you really need someone to talk to. So those are my access points.
Terrific. I'll be sure to have those all linked. And I just would want to add one thing here is I think a lot of what we're talking about here comes down to exercising choice and boundaries.
Hmm.
Is we have to be able to say yes to certain things. And in order to do that, we've got to be able to say no to other things.
Hmm.
As much as I would love to help every single person out there, I found that there are some people that are best stayed away from
Hmm.
because I don't have the capability, the capacity, the skills, or the power to help every single person out there. Instead, the one person that I do have that power with is myself.
Hmm.
And so I think that a lot of people tend to want to go out and they want to interact with everybody when they say, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna start making connections. I'm gonna go help people. And they want to do it with every single person out there. But what I've heard from you is we have to be very aware and you have to feel things out beforehand. And you've got to be able to, one, be present with what you're feeling and be able to
Yeah.
recognize or identify it, but then discernment, choice. You got to say yes and you've got to be able to say no.
Hmm.
Is there anything that
Definitely.
is there anything that you would wanna leave listeners with before we part ways?
Just as I said, as much as possible, show up, pay attention, participate, show up to life, definitely. And when you find yourself triggered, when you find that life is evoking strong feeling, work with those emotions that I described. Drop into the depths of what you're feeling. Breathe all the way down to your abdomen, expanding your abdomen, rib cage, pausing. Then slowly breathe all the way out. Continue the cycle. Do so as you practice, sitting with your eyes closed. Do so when you're lying awake at night. Say if you're struggling with financial anxiety with all the economic uncertainty, do so when you're out in the world, when you're engaging with people. Just keep your eyes open when you engage with people, and also incorporate the most effective therapeutic interventions to help you facilitate the healing that you cannot fully do on your own.
Terrific. And you made a really good point earlier, I think is worth just mentioning again is it's not just about doing this on the comfort of your own sitting pad or on the mat. The goal is to be able to take these practices and to apply them all throughout our daily lives.
Exactly.
Ben, this has been lovely. I'm so glad we got to connect. Thanks for being here and thanks for sharing this message.
Thank you so much, Julian.